It's a wig. The hair under looks a lot worse, trust me. The next wig I'm getting is a bald cap. I don't know how we got here. Well, I think it started with Timmy Chalamet being just ignorant, talking about opera and ballet. And I remember thinking, well, I care. I love ballet. I haven't been in to see one in years. Not the point, or maybe the point. And of course, many of the videos, shorts and skirts found me and my algorithm, and there were dancers talking about the importance of art and how it's been made more accessible since COVID and how many more people care, etc, etc. And then I digressed and I started looking up things, and a few conversations about ballet-like fashion that I had in somewhat recent past sort of dotted together, and it made me think how much I dislike the infantilization of ballet by Miu Miu, Christian Louboutin, Giambattista Valli and many others, portraying the fashion as overly girly and those fragile little pink babes. I'm pretty sure those dancers would bench press me. I mean, it's not the point, but they're badass. Dancing on broken legs. And there is no way to coherently explain the train of thoughts and series of unfortunate rabbit holes that I went down and still maintaining some level of sanity. So let's just jump into ballets, fashion and stuffs. Not sure what I was saying about sanity. Also, hello and welcome or welcome back to my little fashion corner. Again, this is a wig. The hair underneath looks even worse, but we're dealing with it. It's Wednesday, April Fools, so why not? We're gonna look a fool. Part 1, dancing. Most of the historical references trace the popularization of ballet dancing in Europe to the court of France in mid-16th century. Ballet rises in the Italian Renaissance courts of the 15th century, so nobility was treated to these lavish events, and dancing and music, that was a major part of entertainment. Dancing masters would teach nobility, the steps, and then they would collectively perform and they would participate in the performances and, fun. Everyone was happy. Until one of my favorite Catherines, Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France of mid-16th century. Shout out to Sarah Griswood, who described her as pitting her rivals against each other, she had emerged seemingly above the fray. In her book Game of Thrones, the women who made 16th century Europe. And I embrace early adopters of fighting against the system. Both Queen Consort and Regent of France, coming from an aristocratic family, Italy, Florence, to Italian city. With her marriage to the Dauphin, she brought her culture to the French court. At that time, French court sits still in Paris, in Luxembourg Palace. Catherine de' Medici truly patronized the French ballet decor. By that we mean supported, invested into. The dancing wasn't really what we know now as ballet, but it was a great part of a live performance. It also included lots of music, obviously, singing, stage decor and recited poetry. From a costume point of view, layers and layers of heavy fabric made it quite difficult to move, because wired linen or cotton, furs and silk and brocade, those aren't exactly pillars of agile clothing. And we are still some 100 years ahead of creating lycra leotards. Shoes were more the style of courtly pointy shoes with what I would call a kitten heel, rather than on point as you know it now. Dancers also wore masks or elaborate headpieces, which made it hard to move. Therefore, those dance steps were small hops and slides and curtsies and promenades and gentle turns, and it was all about safety first, I think. A combo of two of my fave French monarchs, Catherine de' Medici and Louis XIV, in one video is a treat. Catherine's daughter Elizabeth married Philip II of Spain. Therefore, they created a connection to Anne of Austria, who was the mother of Louis XIV. Catherine's children didn't maintain the Valois dynasty, as her sons left no surviving heirs, and therefore Henry IV was the first of Bourbons ascending to the French throne. Why does the court of Louis XIV matter in all of this? I'm glad you asked. Several reasons. Rabbit hole. He moved the court to build, reconstruct, expand, upgrade his father's hunting lodge, which was a total mansion. Let's not pretend it was a cottage in the middle of nowhere. It was a mansion surrounded by the box, sure, but still a mansion. In Versailles, 1682, depending on the day, anywhere between 3,000 to 10,000 courtiers attended the court. Notoriously, extremely complex code and hierarchy was put in place around every move of Louis XIV to control the court. The so-called domestication of nobility in response to French civil unrest was turning aristocrats into servants who always wanted to be in the sovereign's good books, which came with praise and benefits or gold. This slowly became a code for European codes, internalizing moral standards and repressing any aggression or individuality. Center everything around the monarch, the heirs, and the dynasty. Court customs and etiquette would then be socialized so that your court morals and standing took over your entire social life. Why does this matter? Feed an isolated system valuing different streams of art, and it will continue to produce culture. Turns out, through paintings, poetry, music, fashion, and gossip, you could maintain a semblance of individuality, and you'd hold on to that for dear life. If you are into niche sociology, I strongly recommend a book by Norbert Elias, The Civilizing Process. Not that I'm here trying to revamp or help the aristocratic public image, not at all. The book is quite interesting, especially if you didn't grow up learning about the Holy Roman Empire. For some reason, Research Linda thought that this wasn't an important tidbit, so here you go for the test after. The Luxembourg Palace, that is in Paris, to Versailles, that was about 3 to 4 hours ride in a horse-drawn carriage. Procession would obviously take a lot longer. Now, we all know dancing at court was a thing. Is a thing. I don't frequent them courts these days. During the reign of Louis XIV, Louis the God-given, Louis the Sun King in Ballet de la Nuit, he enjoyed dancing quite a bit to start the evening with, and then professional dancers were hired for the rest of the festivities in the night. And I'm fairly certain that dancing for money was a thing before. However, this is laying foundations to ballet as we know it. Following its evolution, we have also experienced the development of a whole lot of culture around it. What started as entertainment for the rich and famous has evolved, and in 2026 we, I think, can talk about this as high art as it was intended, watched on grand stages, and thank goodness the etiquette following ballet changed. Ballet dancers of the 17th century were predominantly male. They wore heeled shoes, stiff skirt made of wire and brocade, leather masks, similar to those seen in ancient Greek plays or dramas, with depicted, exaggerated tragic or comedic expressions, was smile or frown, or anger. Okay, I digress. Masks were abandoned after ballet master Jean-Georges Noverre and choreographer Maximilien Jardel said, "We're done here." Seeing how they limited the dancers' movements as they couldn't see, and the ability to act through facial expressions, it was over the face. So out with them. And similarly, gone were voluminous hairstyles and wigs. She says sitting here in one. Those were not helping those movements either. It wasn't the ballet as we know it. That developed a lot later, mostly in St. Petersburg. And so in 1661, a dance academy opened in Paris, and 20 years later, ballet moved from the courts to the stage. First, there was opera ballet, and then about a century later, Jean-Georges Noverre, again, argued they should be split, as ballet is extremely expressive through movement and emotions between dancers. That's established as ballet d'action. This has laid the proper foundation of ballet in the evolution of both French and Russian schools, and you can follow their own distinct characteristics. Ballet was brought to Russia by Peter the Great to his court to elevate Russia's name in Europe, and the first Russian school of ballet was founded in 1738, Imperial Ballet School under Empress Anna. Ballet in Russia became so popular, it is a big part of the culture, and many great performers, choreographers, the Vaganova training method as an example, and so many top famous plays came from Russia. Swan Lake, of course, Don Quixote, Romeo and Juliet, Nutcracker, which, fun fact, was a flop when it came out. Can you imagine? And in contrast, the first ballet academy in the UK was established in 1926. According to the History of Pointe Shoe book, women began to dance ballet in 1681. However, it was until late 18th century that it was male dominated. As I said, the dancing shoes were heeled, and the removal of the heel is credited to dancer Marie Camargo of the Paris Opera Ballet, enabling her to perform more technical jumps and leaps. So we went from the kitten tail shoe to a flat shoe tied to the feet by ribbons, and it had the pleats folded under the toes so that dancers can better execute turns and sort of fully extend their feet. The move en pointe was initiated by a French dancer and choreographer, Charles-Louis Didelot, who incorporated flying into his choreography. The dancers were wired in the theatre. As they were lifted up, they ended up on their tippy toes for a period of time before liftoff, which I'm sure it's not the scientific term, but we're gonna go with it. And it was a huge success and everyone loved it, so there was more. Maria Taglioni first danced La Cifilde en pointe. Her shoes were still silk. Imagine how fragile that must have been, with ribbons, added padding for the toes, and a little bit of leather to help hold the shoe. By the way, ballet, the term, comes from Italian ballare, which is to dance. Half of the terms and names being Italian, half of the terms being French. I don't know what to even say. I am really sorry if I pronounce anything French in Italian. Really sorry. In late 19th century Italy, dancers started adding a platform and a little box of layered fabric to hide their toes in. Interestingly, by 1880s, shoemaker Salvatore Carpezio, he improved the overall construction of pointe shoes, as he'd been repairing pointe shoes for dancers for quite some time. And then in early 20th century, Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova, who was said to be vulnerable to injury arched insteps and slender feet. So she inserted tough leather soles into her shoes for support and flattened and hardened the toe area to form a little box. And what I will try not to go into is the fact that modern ballet dancers were predominantly women, and the reputation of ballerinas declined in the late 19th century. Before, it was just, men having fun, I guess. But women dancers, they were stuck between the high class and praise for being talented and, performing so well. However, often poor, marginalized, seen as workers and not artists. And on top of that, heavily sexualized. They became sexual commodity, and more often than not, they were forced into sex work. See also the abonné balcony. As I said, I'm trying not to go into it because I'd lose it, but it is linked to fashion and how ballerinas evolved thanks to this male audience. We made it to the 18th century. We started with heel shoes, no longer. We also ditched masks, wigs. We started using more commercial fabrics like tulle and muslin, which are basically just cheaper cotton fabrics that were factory produced essentially. And we mentioned Maria Taglioni, who gave us the archetypal look of the romantic ballerina that was in the 1932 ballet La Cifilde. Tutu skirt, which only got shorter and shorter, came out of Russia during Marius Ivanovich Petitpas' teaching era, and I was absolutely delighted to learn that the term is believed to have originated in France. It is an alteration of the word cuckoo, which is basically slang for ass. Term which, these men sitting on abonné balconies would use, gazing upon petite, slender, romantic ballerinas below them. As I said, trying not to talk about misogyny too much today. It's still before 9 a.m. In the 1960s, what became more common as practice wear were leotards. The leotard was created by 19th century French acrobat Gilles Léotard. Up until the 1960s, leotards were worn mainly by circus performers and gymnasts. The first leotard for ballet was made of knitted cotton fabric, which allowed for some stretch, but then became baggy. It didn't stretch back. This was followed by brine nylon, which also offered a little bit of stretch, but still would eventually become misshapen. But the 1960s saw the invention of a stretch fabric that would knot back or lose shape, spandex, known under the commercial name Lycra. It was patented 1958 and released to the public in 1962. Eventually, it made its way into dancewear. It was quite revolutionary for the practice wear, and then later also stage costumes. In the 70s and 80s of the 20th century, gymnast wear was massively popularized, and all that lycra-based wear became very, very popular amongst ballet dancers as it was sticking to the body, kept shape, was easily maintained, washable, came in all sorts of colors. Everyone was winning. All that fashion evolution of what sounds like, you know, removing layers of clothes wasn't really happening at courts anymore. So in the 17th century, ballet traveled through French courts and slowly moved to ballet academies and theaters. In the 18th century, it spread through Europe, further establishing those academies, but strangely, it was losing popularity in France. Vive la Révolution, I guess. It was quite interesting to learn that Serge Pavlovich Diaghilev and his company, the Ballet Russes, traveled to Paris and reinvigorated Europe's passion for the performance style in the very early 20th century. Because of the Russian Revolution, the ballet company could not return back to their home country, and therefore they were forced to stay in Western Europe, setting a couple of bases. With their excellent technique and commitment to training, causing ballet's popularity to rise and spread once again. Until then, ballet was quite niche art form, especially in the UK. It is crazy how unimportant British Isles and English and Scottish courts were in comparison to the Holy Roman Empire, French or Spanish kingdoms in the forming years of 12th to late 17th century, maybe even early 18th, but you know, don't say it to the Brits. Colonization makes thievery corporation. Anyway, what we know now as the Royal Ballet was founded in 1931, merging into the Association of Operatic Dancing of Great Britain that was from 1926. So 1926, 1931, merged later. The Royal Ballet, the modern name, was founded by Nina de Valois. She recruited dancers and choreographers like Frederick Ashton, and his work helped to lift up the repertoire and draw in audiences. However, these audiences were quite limited to the upper class. Coming to part 2, fashions of ballet spectators. Well, if the better born people are there, etiquette and style won't be far behind. We'll actually be far ahead of them because you're no one until you're talked about. The National Portrait Gallery website allows you to browse collection by utilizing a fabulous thing called full text search to browse their tags and metadata. Metadata? So I looked up opera dresses from 1800s and it's Edwardian and Victorian eras in the UK, but the etiquette is maintained. The website shows some of the examples of opera dresses. The evening attire included a menstrual cloak, it was ankle length, in contrast to a morning coat, and wearing that over your frock wasn't mandatory. As a respectable, better-born woman, you couldn't have possibly gone out to opera or ballet without the evening cloak. The scandal. You are there to be seen after all. Why is everything so? Long hair itches. The cloak itself is a piece of luxury. It's often lined with fur, embellished, embroidered, all the trimmings. Now, late in 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution and aforementioned thievery corporation, was making regular people richer. Fashion was the logical next steps after climbing down the trees. It's always been about fashion, and now also using the term nouveau riche as derogatory. Early 20th century, with ballet russes settling in Western Europe, haute couturiers could not get enough. Also, somewhere in there, men were flocking back into the dancing academies. I mean, unless there was a world war happening. The Georgian era still follows Victorian etiquette, although there are changes in the society. Also, opera and ballet are interchangeable terms here, kinda, as they are often performed in the same theatre. You will have those that were not born into status, but have come to status through businesses and vast amounts of money, or marriage and vast amounts of money. The term dollar princess is from this era, so it's very important to maintain public image. I'll try my best describing what an evening could look like. We will be learning from Emily Post's etiquette book from 1922. Before the performance starts, we need to show off some of the fabulous frock, and we gotta scan who's who and who's in and scheme connections, and part of that evening will be walking about in the foyer and paying visits to boxes. Gentlemen. Gentlemen leave their coats in the box, as well as their hat. Top hat, always. Collapsible hats are for those who don't retain a box in the theatre, which ew. Gentlemen wear tails, white waistcoats, starched to perfection, white tie and white gloves, which is interesting because white gloves are almost exclusively ballroom attire, or weddings. Gentlemen are also expected to help ladies remove their scarves or shawls and enter the box. Because there's a curtain involved, you might not have help ready to hold it for you. The hostess always sits in the farther seat from the stage, front row in the corner, giving up the better seat for her guest. There are usually 5 seats in the box, 4 in 2 rows, and then 1 floating for the third guest if there is any. The oldest or most distinguished lady sits down first in the seat closest to the stage, then the hostess, and then if there is a third lady guest, she is the next to sit down in the center of the front row and waits for one of the gentlemen to help her with the chair. So you've got 2 seats in the back, walk up a miniature aisle, and then 3 seats in the front as a maximum, I believe. And if the third guest is gentlemen, they'd sit behind the ladies. They'd also make sure the curtains are tightly shut during the performance and no light enters the box. I'm already exhausted, but we've barely begun. This is a social event. Watching art is secondary. I mean, when they started installing electricity in theaters in late 1800s and they would dim the lights during performance, people would complain that they cannot be seen. And that is one of the reasons why God invented and popularized opera glasses or theatre bins, binoculars, or lorgnettes. Those are those mounted on a long handle. I don't know why I'm demonstrating like you don't know what that means. If you are a gentleman guest, you're expected to visit other boxes, walking about. However, you're not visiting your gentleman friends, obviously, but ladies of your friends who will then introduce you to the other guests. If you only know the gentleman in the box, you must not enter. Lady of the house's rules apply for the ladies' box. So say you would like to introduce or present your friend Tom Branson, formerly a chauffeur, now the land agent of Downton Abbey, father to Sibby Branson of the Crowley family. You will be presenting him to Mrs. Astor. You must first ask her permission to bring Tom Branson, not Mr. Branson, he's not elderly, and Mrs. Astor may admit them. Or not, she might be busy, hosting not ex-chauffeurs. What's bizarro is that gentlemen can just rock up to strangers' boxes should they spot a lady who's a family friend, although he must know her really well. You will be offered a chair, but you shouldn't be paying visits if that means leaving your ladies alone. If all seats were offered to visitors and gentlemen went about paying visits to their friends, you need to keep an eye out on whether you're still welcome to stay, or should you perhaps be getting back to your own hostess's box as well. It is the duty of a gentleman to hurry back to their hostesses, even if they're not done making connections. Their support to the hostess takes precedence. After the light goes down for curtains, you must be in the box you belong in, and it isn't permitted to speak during performance or overture. If you are arriving late or leaving early, do it as quietly as possible. I'm exhausted. Allow me to add, this was 1922 upper class in England versus the Civil War happening in Ireland at the same time, which resulted in the Anglo-Irish Treaty and what now is Northern Ireland opting out of the Republic. Just to remind myself, Edwardian Victorian contemporary written down memoirs, art, travel journals, etiquette guides, cookbooks, these are almost always written from the rich and the richest people's perspective. Back to fashions. From 1900s, with the settlement of ballet Russes in Western Europe, relationships start to form between ballet and fashion. The production of Sleeping Beauty in 1921 by Sergei Diaghilev, dressed in pastel colors and their lilac, was to inspire Elsa Schiaparelli to create her signature Sleeping Blue. The Sleeping Beauty ballet is often credited to be that pivotal moment for designers. But I say it's a combination of things, It's after a world war and rich people want pretty things back. The Industrial Revolution continues to make more people rich and the demand for fashion goes up because it was a status thing. And there's lots to say about Christian Dior dressing rich Americans, but for another day, about Christian Dior video. If there is a ballet about rich people at the French Riviera Coco Chanel cannot but design the fits, and that is Le Train Bleu from June 1924. Jean Lanvin was creating romantic full-skirted dresses. In contrast, the sleek sheets and tunics that were in vogue at the time. And Madeleine Vionnet, she took on board the influence of ballet, going so far as to title a dress from her collection in 1924-1925 called The Ballerina. In 1932, issue of Vogue devoted 8 whole pages to the Ballet Russes de Monte Carlo production of the Cotillon. Costumes were designed by Christian Berard, but created by Barbara Karinska, who would then go on and be chief designer for the New York City Ballet, establish her own couture line there. Karinska was one of the pioneers of making tulle costumes in layers of different colors, said Patricia Mears, the deputy director of the Fashion Institutes of Technology in New York. Christian Berard was made with Coco Chanel because art, and she was definitely influenced by the embellished and sequined costume Berard created, but maybe more importantly, Berard was mentoring young Christian Dior, who is an up-and-coming designer at the time, and he is swiftly rising to fame. Christian Dior post-World War II fashions. I will forever credit him for doing so, and not Coco Chanel. Thank you very much. His creations around the new look in 1947 are very much contemporary ballet inspired, and he is a bit more recognized for it than the other designers of that time. And it might not be massively obvious to us, since the piece that is most associated with the new look is the bar suit or the bar jacket with the skirt, but I think it's really fair to say. And with that, you've got a social establishment of ballet with lead ballerinas wearing the most prominent designers of that time. Like Margot Fontaine, one of the ballerinas dancing under Ninette de Valois, was eventually appointed prima ballerina assoluta of the company by Queen Elizabeth II. At least that was in Italian. She loved Dior's work. His post-war styles based on the 19th century romance and ballerinas being, petite and slim, perfect match. She remained loyal to Dior until his passing. The V&A article on A Night at the Opera is pretty interesting short read. They show some cool pieces from the UK, and because of the many British heirs married off to other courts, there's certainly similarities when you look at historical items from Russian and Prussian or other courts. They sort of influence each other, and there are also some examples from the US, so if you're keen to continue further down that rabbit hole, V&A. Designers continue to either draw inspiration from ballet or partner directly with the academies. One of my absolute favorites remains Iris van Herpen's work with New York City Ballets and their annual gala. It is unbelievably beautiful. I mean, her fashion is just unbelievable. That's the word that we're going for. But the collaborations, I tried confirming how long they've been together, and it's been more than a decade. I think their first was in 2013. Iris van Herpen is a Dutch designer. She is so incredibly talented, designing since 2007 under her name. She just can't miss. Unbelievable. She's an haute couture house as well. Just check them out. Since the 1930s, ballet has been frequently featured in designers' collections, fashion magazines, and they also continue to inspire the fitted bodies to create a tiny torso and waist with a full skirt, promoting that bell-shaped silhouette. Christian Dior, Pierre Balmain, Cristobal Balenciaga, Coco Chanel, Yves Saint Laurent, all the famous names of that time were designing tulle skirts and dresses, tights, bolero jackets, and all sorts of point shoes look-alike and ballet flats. Nowadays we see men happily wearing ballet flats or ballet flat-like shoes. They're not the best, but they're definitely the most universal shoe a woman can own. It's work appropriate, you can run errands in it, younglings can wear it to school, whatever. They're not massively comfortable, are they? But you can put some insoles in it and you're sucking diesel. Some of the more recent designer collaborations, Valentino, Victor and Rolf, but also Vivienne Westwood. I cannot go without mentioning Vivienne Westwood's costume for Vienna State Ballet in 2014. She also worked on a rebrand campaign for the English National Ballet. Part 3. What you wear doesn't matter. I don't know. Working title. Everything evolves and things change. And I'm not always okay with that fact, but you know, that's life and we kind of adapt. I mentioned this all stems from the I don't want to be working in ballet or opera or things where it's like, hey, keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about this thing anymore. Why that comment was absolutely ignorant, setting aside the fact that his grandmother, mother and sisters are ballerinas and Timmy himself trained at the drama school with a strong ballet program. We're not comparing apples and apples here. To say being a successful actor is the same as a successful ballerina or opera singer is just not equal. There are many actors collecting mainstream success and I'd call them not talented. Drama critics would say they're not talented. That is not how, different words. You can be born talented and become an actor, actress, or just become an actor and actress without talent, I guess. You pick. With more coaching and training, you'll get better. I think that's the premise. You have to be born talented and go through years, decades of rigorous training to become a professional performer in opera or ballet. I don't know how much you can learn to dance if you're not massively coordinated, but you can't do much about being born tone deaf. And that's fine. You cannot be born into a ballet family and just get in there only to become better. Opera singers, that's perfect pitch, reading music, playing several instruments, classical singing training, opera training, competing against people that went through the exact same drill. Ballet dancers, that's motor classes for toddlers, ballet classes multiple times a week, gymnastics or flexibility training for the rest of the time, constant performing, so much time and money spent on costumes, commute and performances. None of the things can be substituted by having rich parents or famous parents. You still have to put in the work to get to the baseline of being a pro. Do I like opera and ballet? I do, very much so. And I know many others do. Hopefully it was established that ballet has been evolving, and not just because the riches have been donating billions into the industry, but patron of art is a terminology that we use for a reason. You could have seen Jeff Bezos and his lovely lady traipsing around Paris during Haute Couture week or schmoozing with Jonathan Anderson showing off his Dior collection. Still massively disappointed by that, by the way. I guess job is a job is a job. That said, I don't think the Bezoses are donating millions and millions to keep the museums, ballets and theatres open, or schools. I think that maybe, I hope that many of the families that have hundreds of years of family money and perhaps still continue to donate, as that is hopefully something that they have been brought up to value, old money class. And I'm only using the term old money to make an argument. I guess let's fight classism with classism today. If you were brought up to keep up art and value it, you're probably more likely to continue doing so. We live in times where there are more millionaires than before, and on top of that, we have billionaires on track to become trillionaires. People care. Regular people. People are following dancers on social media more than ever since COVID made it more accessible. Online classes and all sorts of things. So many barriers were torn down. And yet when you try to Google ballet and fashion because you're trying to make a silly little video, you'll come across many posts about how people should dress up for opera or ballet because that's just manners and they're spoiling the experience for others. If I have to read the argument of everyone has a nice shirt and trousers at home one more time. Nosebleed tickets in London cost £35. That is, 2 weeks of Aldi shopping for many families? I am very happy for people that didn't have to choose which bills to pay, but that is probably not the fight we want to pick today. Let's look at the values among the rich. Collecting Demna's Balenciaga that Kardashians got for free to make it famous again isn't exactly an art form. Turns out, late-stage capitalism, buying anything is political, even fame. So what are we doing here? What is the argument that we're trying to make? Do we care about art? Yes. Are we transforming the way things were into how things could be? I wish we could change things, but do we collectively have enough money for that? Because I don't think Elon is going to help us out. And I don't see the Arnault family doing that either. They're busy collecting more, brands for LVMH. Speaking of, guess who was in the Epstein files? I digress. I don't have a conclusion. Things are complicated. Ballet and opera and the culture around it evolved. It's a lot more accessible as art now, but there are still systemic ditches between people. I feel it's quite unfair to put the pressure on us. Arrogant and ignorant statements from people who could change things don't help much, do they? Regular people's support move to supporting through social channels, because that's a very cheap way for us to support these arts, often cheaper than going into the actual theatre. So how much can we really do? And it has nothing to do with appreciating the art. It feels like it never had. After all, it's been a month and the outrage is over. We're back at it. Anyway, thanks for putting up with me until this very end of what could potentially be a completely nonsensical and useless video. But hey, you were here and I appreciate that. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!